Vezon walked between worlds. At least, that's how he saw it. Lately, it seemed like every step he took left him somewhere completely different. One moment, he was out in the sunshine, seeing Matoran and Dark Hunters working together in perfect harmony. Granted, they were building a giant cannon, but they were still getting along well. The next moment, everything had shifted and he was in a quite different place. Here, a group called the Great Beings had built a 40 million tall mechanical being they named Makuta. Unfortunately, his brother Mata Nui was plotting a rebellion against him. How had all this begun? He tried to remember, never the easiest thing for Vezon to do. He had donned a Kanohi Olmec, the Mask of Dimensional Gates, which he had found on Destral. A portal opened up in front of him then. Eager to escape the island, he stepped through it, only to find himself facing an oncoming tidal wave. It washed over him, but he did not drown. Instead, he fell through another portal, winding up in the middle of a swamp. And then another, and then another. It took him quite some time to figure out what had happened to him. That his body, his essence, had fused to that of the Olmec. He was now, for all intents and purposes, a walking dimensional gateway. There was still a lot to learn, of course. Was the effect permanent? Could he ever learn to control the power, so he could pick and choose where he went to? If he was holding something or someone, would they travel with him? Wouldn't that be interesting? He thought. First thing I do is find Makuta Teridax and give him a great big hug. Tahu used his elemental powers to light a small campfire. It was foolish, he knew. There were exo-Toa in the area and they would zero in on the heat. Then again, being a Toa of fire, they probably couldn't miss him anyway. He glanced around the camp at his team. It was not a sight to inspire confidence. In the days since Teridax took over the universe, the Toa Nuva had scattered. They were too easy of a target if they stayed together. Hooking up with other fugitives as they went, they made for places of relative safety in order to regroup and plan. This explained why Tahu was sitting in the blasted ruins of Karzani with a Komatoran Kopiki, Jomak, a female Order of Matanui member with the ability to shatter and reassemble her body, Kraka, a female shape-shifting Rahi, and 2 Dark Hunters, Guardian and Lariska. Not exactly Gali, Lewa, and Kopaka, thought Tahu, but they will have to do. We'll stay here a few more hours, then move out, he said. Anua said there were a few Order of Matanui agents somewhere south of here, looking for a cache of weapons and supplies. We'll hook up with them. And then what? Grumbled Guardian. Throw rocks at the sky? Challenge the wind with Korak blasters? All we're doing is delaying the inevitable, and we all know it. And the alternative? Asked Jomak. Bow and scrape before Makuta, begging him for one more moment of life in which to serve him? Let me die, then, as long as I do it as a free being. Tahu, what are we going to do? Kopiki asked in hardly more than a whisper. Guardian is right. We're trying to fight the universe itself. No, we're not, said Tahu. We're fighting a mad being who controls the power of a universe. And it's not like learning a new machine at a Ta-Mechu forge. It takes time and practice to master so complex a system, and we're not going to give him that time. We're going to do a Pohatu on him. A Pohatu? Asked Kopiki. Tahu smiled. That's right. When in doubt, smash everything and hope you're somewhere else when it all goes boom. Guardian got up and walked away from the fire. He had nothing against Tahu, but there had to be a better way. Maybe instead of running from place to place, they should be trying to find a way out of this universe. Could be this place was lost, and it was time to accept it and move on. It wasn't an easy choice, but those weren't the kind he was used to making anyway. Beneath his feet, the ground opened. Bonds made of solid stone wrapped around him, yanking him down into the hole even as he screamed. Then the barren earth slammed shut again, and he was gone. The team was on its feet. "It's Makuta," said Tahu. "He knows where we are. He's toying with us." "Tell us something we don't know," snapped Lariska. "Like, what do we do about it?" Before Tahu could answer, a dozen Exotoa appeared on the rise. Their missiles were loaded and aimed at the fugitives. The lead machine spoke in the voice of Makuta Teridax. "Citizens of the Makutaverse, you are in an unauthorized area. You will accompany these Exotoa to Metru Nui, where you will be retrained for new work that will benefit all my people. You will live out your lives there in peace and prosperity, wanting for nothing, or you die now." "You know what?" said Lariska. "This may turn out to be the shortest revolution on record." Axon had been running for many days and nights. After being teleported from Metru Nui by the power of Makuta, he had found himself in a vast, barren landscape. At first, there was no sign of any life at all, Matoran or Rahi, or any habitation. That changed when he began to hear the screams. They were cries of agony, and they were coming from Brutaka, though his old friend was nowhere to be seen. The warrior had raced off in the direction of the screams. That had been how long ago? A week ago? A month? He had crossed the wasteland that never seemed to end, but had been unable to find Brutaka. Strangely, he had felt neither hungry nor thirsty on the journey, just an overpowering need to keep searching. A few things had begun nagging at him, though, like the buzz of a fireflyer in his ear. The landscape never changed. He could swear he had seen the same rock formation time and time again, as if he were running in a circle, and Brutaka, not even he could endure what he seemed to be for weeks on end. His screams should have died out long ago. Then the crack appeared in the sky. It was only a small one, but bright light flowed through it from somewhere outside. That, too, made no sense. No sooner had Axon said that to himself than the crack got bigger. Then more cracks started to appear, in the sky, in the ground, all around him. "This can't be happening," Axon thought. "This can't be real! This isn't real!" The next instant, Axon was sitting on a beach. Water lapped against the shore in front of him, and behind, a gentle breeze stirred jungle trees. Flying Rahi circled in the sky overhead, now and then diving down to steal a fish from the sea. There was no sign of the endless waste he had been in before. "Of course not," he thought. "I was never there. With his powers increased by being in Matanui's body, Makuta can pierce even an Order member's mental shields. My days and nights of running, Brutaka's screams, all an illusion." Axon rose. He still had his armor, his mask, and his axe. He wondered if perhaps his mask, which could see through any deception, had been the difference between his escaping Makuta's trap and being lost in the fantasy forever. He didn't know for certain where he was, nor did he care at the moment. All that mattered to him was where Makuta was, and he knew that answer. Somehow, some way, he was going to make it back to Metru Nui, and Makuta was going to pay for what he had done, even if it cost Axon his life. Far away from Axon's island, Tahu and his ragtag team were facing the potential end of their own lives. The group was confronted by a squad of heavily armored Exotoa, prepared to imprison or execute them. Tahu doubted the machines much cared which option they pursued. He calculated the odds. Lariska, Kraka, Jomak, and he could take out 4 Exotoa, maybe even 8 if they caught a break. That would still leave 4 of the machines free to cut them down. In the past, he would have just accepted the situation and vowed to go down fighting. Now he was trying to use his brain as much as his brawn, because the fight against Makuta could not afford to lose warriors to needless sacrifice. He had settled on a plan. A mock surrender, followed by an escape attempt before they reached Metru Nui, when the ground began to shake. At first, he thought it was another attack by Makuta. Then the tremors became more violent, and some of the Exotoa lost their footing. They didn't have to bother getting up again. A chasm opened up directly under the machines and swallowed them up. Tahu ran to the edge of it and saw nothing but darkness, at least, at first.
"Brother, could you give me a hand?"
Tahu smiled. Anua Nuva was clinging to the rocky wall of the crevice. The Exotoa had not been so lucky, having tumbled down into what looked like a bottomless pit. The Toa of Fire helped the Toa of Earth back to solid ground. He nodded toward the chasm, saying, "You still do good work."
"I've been keeping in practice,"
said Anua. "We were just about to head south to find those order agents you mentioned, the ones looking for weapons," said Tahu. Anua shook his head.
"Don't bother. Rakshi got them, and the supplies."
"Then we pick another direction," said Tahu, "and we keep moving." Lariska walked over, sheathing her dagger. "So, any bright ideas? There are more Exotoa where those came from."
"And more Rakshi,"
agreed Tahu.
"Anu Matoran,"
said Anua, smiling. "What are you talking about?" asked Lariska.
"Anu Matoran live underground most of their lives,"
explained the Toa of Earth.
"The first time they come to the surface, the bright light overwhelms them. Most are blinded for a short time, until they get used to the environment. That's how Teridax is now. He's not used to all this new power yet, or trying to see in every direction at once. He needs other eyes and ears within the universe, the Rakshi and the Exotoa."
"What do you have in mind? And does it include explosions?" asked Tahu, hoping it did.
"Oh, it does," Anua assured him. "A Toa of Earth learns to, excuse the pun, keep his ear to the ground. Makuta may be all-powerful, but he still needs to make Rakshi the same old way, by making worm-like Krata who then turn into his warriors. And I think I may know of where those Krata are coming into being."
"We strike there," said Tahu. "Maybe we can cut off his supply of Rakshi, temporarily. It's a start." "How far?" asked Lariska.
"We'll get there," said Anua. "Makuta picked the one source of energized protodermis the Order of Motunui wouldn't think to try and shut down. The one on their own island of Daxia. He leveled their fortress and seized control of the island. That's where we have to go."
"Guarded?" asked the Dark Hunter.
"Like it's the treasure of the great beings," said Anua. "Bring an extra dagger."
Lua's mission was simple and straightforward. With the help of information from a surviving Order agent, he was headed to the island of Artaka. Somehow, the powerful ruler of that land had to be convinced to do more than sit back and make armor and weapons. They needed him in the fight. As he came within sight of the island, he could tell that he was already too late. Shattered Rakshi littered the coastline, but more were advancing on the fortress. Artaka's Matoran workers were fighting a desperate holding action, but it was a lost cause. The only hope was to somehow pull off a rescue of Artaka himself before Makuta's forces overcame him. Lua was about to launch himself into a power dive when a voice echoed in his head. "Do not," it said. "It is too late. But there is another who can aid you if I have fallen. Go to him. Persuade him to join your fight." "Who are you talking about? And where do I find him?" said Lua. "There is still time," said the voice of Artaka. "I will send you to him. The rest is up to you." The world spun, and then Lua was no longer in the air above Artaka. Instead, he was standing in a dark cave, facing a blank wall of stone. He could feel something behind him, the way one could feel a bog leech crawling up the back of the neck. Lua wanted to turn around and see what was there, and at the same time, he knew he didn't really want to see. "Turn," This voice was also in Lua's mind only, but it had none of the comfort and assurance that could be found in Artaka's. If it was possible for a voice to have a scent, this one reeked of death and decay. "Who are you? Where am I?" said Lua, staying right where he was. "You are at the end of your journey. The end of all journeys, Toa. And my name is Tren Krom." Kapura moved swiftly, for him, through the shadows of Metru Nui. His destination was the outskirts of Ga Metru, specifically a portion of the archives underneath that spot. The sign carved into the wall outside his shelter had told him where to go, and even who was to meet him there, but not the most important answer. Why? Cautiously, he peered around the corner of a building. The way seemed clear. Rakshi stood guard over most entrances to the archives, but not this one. It led to a section of the vast museum that had been deemed unsafe decades ago and abandoned. Even when Matoran and Toa retreated below in the days right after Makuta's takeover of the universe, they had avoided this region. He slipped across the street and, with great effort, raised the hatch. It let out a shrill creak he was sure every Rakshi in the city could hear. Kapura froze. Was that the whistling sound of Rakshi flying through the air toward him? No, it was just the steam escaping in Ta Metru. He waited a moment more, and when no hostile force appeared, he ducked into the tunnel and closed the hatch behind him. It was dark and dank inside. The faint stench of muaka lingered in the air. Kapura found himself remembering another recent visit to the archives, when he had gotten lost in the maze of passageways. That time, he had almost wound up a meal for an escaped exhibit, and it was only the timely arrival of Toa Takanuva that saved him. He wished that his friend had picked a different place for their meeting, but then remembered that only this sort of a spot would do. "You're late." Maku stepped out from a recess in the wall. Her blue armor was stained with mud, and she moved with a slight limp, a souvenir of an escape with some Exo-Toa a few days before. "Sorry," said Kapura. "I had to make sure I wasn't followed." "We'll wait a few more minutes for Hafu," Maku said. She sounded tired. No, beyond tired, Kapura thought. More like she was barely holding herself together. "Is he working today?" Maku nodded. Kapura frowned. All of the Pomatoran carvers had been put to work carving statues of Makuta for placement all around the city. The order hadn't come from their new Great Spirit, but rather from their new Turaga of Metru Nui, Akmu. No, he wasn't a true Turaga. He had never been a Toa, after all, which was the prerequisite. But his past association with Makuta had put him in a position of power in the city. "We should have killed that lousy traitor long ago," Maku muttered. Every Matoran remembered Akmu's crimes on the island of Matanui, involving the sale of Kodan balls tainted with Makuta's darkness. Many had heard the tales of his sins on Metru Nui as well, in the weeks before the Great Cataclysm. Although he had largely kept to himself for the past year, no one really trusted him. But Turaga Vakama insisted he not be exiled. "Better to keep a doom viper beside your bed than to let it wander free. At least then, you will know from which direction its strike will come." The hatch opened again with a screech. A shaft of dirty light pierced the gloom of the archives. Maku and Kapura instinctively hid until the light was gone. Then they heard the reassuring sound of Hafu's voice, saying, "Anyone remember why we wanted to come back to this city?" Maku laughed, though there really was nothing to laugh at. But it felt good to be around these two Matoran again. So many of the others up above had given up. Rakshi and Exo-Toa everywhere, and the only Toa visible were the Toa Haga, who seemed oblivious to everything going on around them. When questioned, they insisted that Makuta Teridax had been defeated and all was well on Metru Nui. Worse, one could tell they really believed this delusion. "What's the situation?" asked Hafu. "You know that symbol is only supposed to be used in an emergency." "This is an emergency," Maku assured him. She had taken a great risk drawing the help symbol, a crude sketch of Arakshi, near the homes of her friends. Akmu had forbidden the creation of any unauthorized art. The Gamatoran turned and headed deeper into the archives. Hafu and Kapura followed. She led them all the way down into the sublevels, moving as if she knew the place as well as Ga-Metru. Kapura was completely lost, and he suspected Hafu was too. "In here," Maku said quietly. She beckoned them to follow her into a large chamber that had once housed a particularly nasty specimen of Rahi primate. There was something else in there now. A toa of water, wounded, stretched out on the stone floor. But it wasn't Gali or Gaaki or any other toa Kapura recognized. "Who is she? Where did she come from?" asked Hafu. Suspicion colored his voice. He had seen too many Makuta tricks to believe anything at first glance anymore. "She says her name is Tuyet," said Maku, "and that she's here to help." Hafu had heard the name once. Something to do with Toa Lakan, if he recalled correctly, but he didn't know the tale. "She doesn't look like she can help herself, let alone us." "You might be surprised," the female Toa said, lifting her head to look at Hafu. "So might a lot of people. Tell me, where is Toa Lakan?" "Dead," said Kapura. "Killed by Makuta." Hafu shot him a look. It wasn't smart to share information with strangers like that. "And Toa Nidiki?" Kapura glanced at Hafu and shrugged. Then he turned back to Tuyet. "Dead, too. Makuta ate him, I guess." "Look, we're happy to see you and all," said Hafu, "but one Toa more or less isn't going to make a difference here. Not unless you have a super weapon hidden away that can cleanse Metrodui of Makuta's forces." Tuyet sat up. She reached into her pouch and pulled out a piece of crystal about the size of her fist. "As a matter of fact, that's exactly what I do have." "And do you think Makuta will give you the chance to use it?" asked Maku, half hopeful, half skeptical. "Makuta is the Great Spirit, correct?" asked Tuyet. "And the Great Spirit knows all about everyone who lives in his universe, where they are, what they're doing. All he has to do is think about them?" Kapura nodded. Tuyet smiled. "Then I am the perfect ally, little ones. I am dead, and have been for some 2,000 years. Makuta Teridax, in the huge robotic body that once belonged to Matanui, surveyed the world he stood upon. There was nothing but water for as far as the eye could see. "And one is 40 million feet tall," reflected Makuta. "One can see quite far." It was, he decided, quite a dull world. Oh, it was true that beneath the surface of the vast ocean, escaped prisoners of the pit still struggled to survive, but they were so unimportant as to be beneath the notice of so great and powerful a being as himself. While it was true he could not affect their fates in the same way that he could one of the living beings that dwelled inside his body, the Toa, Matoran, etc., his new body had enough power to vaporize this ocean, if need be. Perhaps he would do it before he left this world, just for amusement. And make no mistake, he would be leaving this planet of endless sea. There were other worlds out there, teeming with life, waiting to be conquered. Why should he be satisfied with ruling a universe inside this body, when he could master a true universe of planets and suns and stars? This robot body had the power to lay waste to cities, to shatter mountains, and yet Matanui had never used any of it. Well, Makuta would not be so foolish. Naturally, there would be preparations to be made. He would need to extinguish any last bits of rebellion within the universe of the Matoran first. It would be stupid to risk some critical breakdown in his systems in the middle of a war, just because some tribe of Matoran decided to value the concept of freedom over the hard, cold facts of death. When this was done, Makuta would beckon the red star above and begin his journey. The thought sparked another, an even more wonderful idea. He had expelled the mask of life from inside him, with the mind of Motunui trapped in the mask. The powerful Kanohi had gone flying into space, perhaps to burn up, or shatter against an asteroid, or, somehow, to find refuge on some other world. Though far away, it was still a part of this body, and Makuta knew he could find it again. He could track it down, no matter where, and extinguish any flickers of hope that Motunui might be feeling. The mask and all its powers were a dust mote in Makuta's eyes now, and he would prove it by crushing it to powder with his armored heel. It was a pleasant fantasy, but there were realities that had to be dealt with first. He had sensed the presence of another Makuta among the Matoran, which should have been impossible. All the other Makuta had been slain, either by him or by order of Motunui agents. Well, that was not strictly true, he supposed. Miserix was still alive, though that former leader of the Makuta did not know it. As far as Teridax's old enemy knew, he had been changed into a two-dimensional drawing on a wall, and that was how everyone else saw him too. In the old days, it would have taken a considerable amount of energy to maintain such a successful illusion, especially for another Makuta. But his powers amplified by his new form, it was practically effortless. But the Makuta he sensed was not Miserix. No, it was one who was totally unfamiliar, and yet disturbingly familiar at the same time. And since he could not be an existing one, nor one who was just created, there was only one answer. He has come from another dimension. My enemies have recruited a Makuta to use against me. How enterprising of them. I must give their new recruit a proper welcome. Mazika and his newfound Makuta ally found themselves in an uninhabited portion of the southern continent. The valley they stood in was actually quite lush and beautiful, but Mazika remembered well the tales of this place. The tall grasses that swayed in the light breeze were guardians of this place. They could sense movement and responded by wrapping themselves around the offending foreign object and strangling it. The remains would then be pulled underground, and the valley would go back to looking beautiful and unspoiled. Stay still, he advised the white-armored Makuta beside him. This was an alternate universe version of Makuta Teridax, from a world where the Makuta had never gone bad. In return for agreeing to leave his old enemy Voltraz there, he had been given the opportunity to bring one inhabitant of that dimension back with him. He had chosen that world's Teridax, hoping the double would be able to predict the actions of the original. We have such things in our universe too, said the alternate Teridax. We know how to deal with them. As Mazika watched, darkness began to creep over the valley. Wherever it passed, the grasses withered and died. Wait a minute, said Mazika, suddenly suspicious. You told me that Makuta in your world had banished all trace of shadow from inside them. How can you control the darkness then? The alternate Teridax gave a whisper of a smile. I cannot, but I can absorb the light. And what is darkness but the absence of light? And now, I believe we have somewhere else we need to be. Walking down the now darkened path, the two allies made their way out of the valley as their quest truly began. Toa-Tuyet could hardly believe her good fortune. Thousands of beings she might have encountered in this universe, and she had found two who did not remember her or her deeds. That would make things so much easier. Her momentary weakness, the result of a difficult journey to get here, had passed. Now she walked through the archives behind the two Matoran, Kapura and Maku, listening to them talk. It had not taken her long to grasp the situation here. Her old fears had been proven right. The Makuta had rebelled against Motunui and now controlled this universe. If Lacan and Diki had listened to me, none of this would have happened, because there would have been no Makuta left alive, she thought. How well she recalled how it had all come about. She had been a Toa in Metru Nui millennia ago. Using a powerful artifact called a Nui Stone, she had tried to make herself mighty enough to destroy those she perceived as threats to peace, the Dark Hunters and the Makuta. She knew other Toa, like Lacan, would object to her plans, so she had kept it all a secret. Unfortunately, it could not stay hidden for long. Dark Hunters arrived in Metru Nui, seeking the Nui Stone they believed she had. To neutralize them, she framed them for murders of Matoran that she herself had committed. Toa Lacan and Toa Nadiki captured the Dark Hunters, but later tumbled to the fact that she was the murderer and had the stone. In the ensuing battle, the stone was shattered and she was captured. The Toa locked her up in the Colosseum until they could decide what to do with her. One night, a golden figure appeared in her cell, identifying himself as Botar of the Order of Matanui. He told her what she had already figured out for herself. Pieces of the Nui Stone were embedded in her body now, making her a living battery of Toa power. No conventional prison would be able to hold her for long, not as long as there were Toa anywhere around from whom she could drain power. But the Order wanted more than a more efficient way to lock her up. They wanted the secret of the Nui Stone so they could make more. This was an effort so secret that only the highest ranks in the Order knew about it. So a complicated plot ensued. Botar teleported Tuyet to another dimension, one where no Toa existed for her Nui Stone to drain. To keep this concealed from lower-ranking Order members, a second Tuyet, from yet another dimension, was taken to the pit in her place. This double was even altered so that she had crystals embedded in her, although not from a Nui Stone. She would remain in the pit, while the original Tuyet would be locked up and interrogated about the nature of the stone. For 1,500 years, the Order tried to pry the secret of the stone out of her, with no success. All the while, she plotted her escape. Working on one of her guards, she managed to convince him of the justice of her cause. After all, the Order disliked Dark Hunters and Makuta as much as she did. Finally, the guard was sufficiently on her side to help her fake her own death in an explosion. Believing her body was vaporized, the Order did not bother to search for her. Meanwhile, she used technology from that dimension to escape. With no map, it took her 2,000 years to make it back to her own universe. 2,000 years filled with visiting worlds teeming with Toa from whom she could draw strength. Finally, she found a way back home, ending up in the Metru Nui archives. As for what had happened to her double in the pit, she had no idea. She supposed the Order would know, and one day, if she was bored, she would squeeze the information out of them. But for now, she had bigger tasks ahead of her. Tuyet had no doubt she could organize and lead a successful rebellion against Teridax and bring him down. But she had no intentions of allowing Matanui to regain control. Thousands of years to think about it had convinced her that Matanui was weak, or he would have wiped out the Makuta himself long ago. No. What this universe needed was a ruler who was strong, decisive, unafraid to do what had to be done. "Someone like me," she said to herself. "Yes, someone very much like me." The all-too-familiar blurring of reality and wave of nausea struck Vezon. He really did have to find a way to control this new power, if for no other reason than it was starting to make him feel really sick. He wasn't sure how beings like Brutaka managed to move between dimensions all the time without losing their sanity. And then again, like Vezon, maybe Brutaka didn't have that much sanity to lose. Anyway, here he was. He was here. Which of course begged the question, where was here this time? The Kanohi Olmec that had become fused to his substance opened dimensional gates the way Matoran opened gift boxes on naming day, and it was impossible to predict where one might end up. He looked down. There was sand under his feet. In fact, there was sand in every direction. At first, he thought he was on a beach, but there was no water nearby. He could see trees and buildings in the distance, though, so he started walking in that direction. The desert, as it turned out, was not very big. It gave way to a lush jungle filled with a number of beings doing one of those things Vezon did his best to avoid: hard work. Some were obviously Lematoran. The others, Vezon did not recognize, though they had the look of villagers. He hated villagers. They were so industrious. One of the villagers loped over to him, using his arms as forelegs. He looked up at Vezon and said, smiling, "Are you a friend of Matanui?" Vezon performed a complicated and challenging feat. He didn't laugh. "Why, yes, little whatever you are. I am." "Are you a Toa, then?" "Nothing but," Vezon said, giving his best noble and heroic smile. "Come on, then," the villager said, dashing off. "You're late." Intrigued, Vezon followed along behind. This place had a Matanui and Toa, so it had to be something like home. But who were these other little runts? And just where was he? Excuse me, villager," Vezon began. "Tardok!" the villagers shouted back at him. Vezon ducked, like he was told, but saw no sign of any tar flying through the air. It took him a moment to realize that it wasn't tar duck he had heard. "Right, whatever. Where am I?" said Vezon. Tardok paused and looked over his shoulder. "Oh, you must be from up north. This is Tessera. Now hurry up, please. Gresh and Toa Kongu need more help." "Gresh?" Vezon said to himself. "What's a Gresh? But Kongu, him I know." They pushed their way through some undergrowth, and Vezon stopped short. There were Toa, a lot of them, and some other warriors he didn't recognize. They were repairing a huge metallic shelter. Jaller was using his firepower to weld shut a seam, while a female in blue armor urged him to hurry up. She wasn't a Toa of Water, at least Vezon didn't think so. Toa of Water usually weren't that pushy. Vezon knew he shouldn't go into the clearing. After all, he wasn't extremely popular with Toa. Then again, if they saw him and attacked, it might make things interesting. It had been all of 2 days since someone had tried to kill him, and he was getting antsy. Head held high, he marched up to where the Toa were working. A few nodded in his direction. One smiled. One Toa of stone even waved. Vezon decided that he really hated this place. "So, who are you exactly?" asked Tardok. "My name is, Toa Vezon," he said, loud enough for all the Toa to hear. "I'm the Toa of Anarchy." Tardok frowned. "Okay, I see. We were really hoping for ice. It gets pretty hot doing this work." Vezon looked around. No one had reacted at all to his name, not even Jaller. Was it possible? No, it was too horrible to think about. Such a tragedy, such a loss, was beyond comprehension. But he had to face the fact. This universe didn't have a Vezon. It never had one. Otherwise, surely someone would be shooting at him by now. "We don't get a lot of, news up north," he said to Tardok. "What exactly goes on here?" "You don't know?" said Tardok. "Well, I suppose I should send you over to see Takua, but I think he's up in Roxas today. It's pretty simple, really. The great beings, through Matanui, made things right around here. Then Matanui went up north, and a few months later, the Toa and Matoran and all the rest showed up." "And what happened to Matanui?" Tardok shrugged. Tahu Nuva said something about the Valley of the Maze and power going back where it belonged. I didn't catch too much of it. I've never been one for history, you know? Vezon turned at the sound of marching feet. A tall figure, unmistakably a Makuta, was leading a column of black-armored warriors in a drill. "They're early," said Tardok. "Ever since Tuma got deposed and the Makuta took over the scroll, they've been nothing if not efficient. I'm glad they're on our side." A few more questions spelled things out for Vezon, or at least came close to it. In this universe, The Makuta had never rebelled against Matanui. The Great Spirit had been allowed to proceed with his mission, whatever that was, without incident. After it was finished, he led at least some of the Toa and Matoran to leave and live with the natives. That included the Makuta, who had smashed the ambitions of some local warlord but held on to the army. Vezon was wondering what they even needed an army for in such a happy, peaceful, idyllic, mind-numbingly boring place as this when his question was answered, in very dramatic fashion. Coming over the dunes in the distance was an army marching right for Tessera. Some of them he recognized, other Skakti like the Paraka, Rudaka and her Vortex, and Makuta Miserix in dragon form. The black-armored riders on the two-legged reptiles were new to Vezon, but he doubted they had come to deliver fruit baskets. "It's an attack!" yelled Tarduk. "Quick, Toa Vezon, go help the Makuta. Use your power. I'll get the others." Use my power. Right, thought Vezon. My power is to get the heck out of here. I just have to figure out how to turn it on. The invaders smashed through the ranks of the Skrull warriors and headed for the village. The Skakti in the lead hurled torches, setting the jungle ablaze. Now would be a really good time for a dimensional gate to... anywhere, Vezon said to himself. Come on. I don't want to die in a universe where I never lived. Who will remember me then? But the power of the Olmec was strangely absent, and all Vezon could do was stand and watch as an onrushing horde surged toward him. Vezon had had better days. His newfound ability to travel to other dimensions had landed him on an alternate world called Spherus Magna, where Makuta, Toa, and some other race called Agori were happily living together. Well, mostly. A pretty good-sized army of Skakti, Vortex, and Spherus Magna natives was headed right for the village in which Vezon stood. It seemed a good time to leave, but Vezon had not yet achieved any mastery over the powers of the Kanohi Olmec that had been merged with him. It didn't work just because he wanted it to, and right now he was starting to wish he had never seen the miserable thing to start with. For the 6th time in the last minute, he willed the Olmec's power to take him away from this reality before the onrushing horde trampled him underfoot. This time, he felt the now familiar sensation of dizziness that preceded a dimensional jump, and saw the world waver around him. But then something happened that had never happened before. Everyone around him froze in place. When he tried to reach out and touch a Toa, his hand passed right through. Worst of all, he wasn't traveling. He seemed to be stuck in a realm of statues. This is better than being killed, he said to himself. Not much better, but better. His addled mind ran through all the possible scenarios. This wasn't much help, as he knew next to nothing about masks of power or how to repair them. If something had gone wrong with the Olmec, he might well be stuck forever. Would that be so bad? The voice was in his head. This wasn't an unusual experience for Vezon, although normally the voices he heard were his own. If it doesn't get any more entertaining than this, yes, Vezon replied. Who am I speaking to? My given name wouldn't mean anything to you. The people of Spherus Magna would call me a great being. And what makes you so great? I do not speak to the beings of this world. They never see me or hear me, and so it is left to their imaginations to conjure what I am like, how I think, and what I believe. The imagination has an infinite capacity to fill in the blanks with what it wants to be there. That's nice, said Vezon impatiently. Can you help me get out of this situation? Why would I? I got you into it. My people created the first masks of power. We certainly know how to shut one off. You don't belong here. In fact, I strongly suspect you don't belong anywhere. And so, now you are nowhere. Is this what great beings do all day? Stick their phantom noses into things that don't concern them and get in the way of a perfectly good lunatic rampaging through realities? Asked Vezon. I am, perhaps, not a typical great being, the voice replied. Eons ago, I made the error of touching the mask of life. As a result, everything around me, furniture, equipment, rays of light, came to life. For their own safety, my fellow rulers imprisoned me. Now all I need fear are my living chains, living blocks of stone, and the screams of light as the darkness extinguishes it. Vezon didn't know anything about what pains a living light might feel, but he did know a light at the end of the tunnel when he saw one. So you're in prison, and so am I. Would you set me free if I could set you free? The voice in Vezon's head was silent for a long time. Lua stood stock still. Artaka had teleported him into a cavern, but he was not alone there. No, evidently he was sharing it with some being named Tren Krom, and something told Lua he really didn't want to get a look at his host. Turn, Tren Krom said again. His telepathic voice reminded Lua of a nest of slithering borer worms. I am ever fine right here, thanks, said Lua. Artaka said, I can guess why you have come, Toa, Tren Krom replied. I too heard the voice of Makuta Teridax coming from every corner of the universe. But what would you have me do? I have knowledge that could be used as a weapon against him, but knowledge without the experience to use it is less than useless. I am bound to this island by the great beings, unable to venture forth. And if the great beings did it, I doubt I have the power to quick free you, said Lua. So this journey was another waste of time. Perhaps, and perhaps, said Tren Krom. There may be a way, but it would involve great risk, and success for you might be worse than failure. Everyone I care about is at risk, Lua answered. Everything that matters to me has been poisoned by Makuta's corruption. I'll do whatever it takes to stop him. You may live to regret your choice, said Tren Krom, but the choice has been made just the same. Lua felt a tentacle wrap around his neck. His arms went up to tear it away, then stopped halfway there. The next instant, the world began to spin, and he felt as if his insides were being yanked out a piece at a time. There was light and pain and impenetrable darkness, and when the shadows cleared away, Lua was staring at himself. He looked down, for only a microsecond, long enough to see a huge tentacled mass grafted to stone. Instinctively, he knew that was Tren Krom's body, and his mind was inside it. Freedom. The word came from Lua's mouth, in Lua's voice, but it was spoken by Tren Krom. After so long, I have a body again. A strong, powerful body that can take me from this wretched place, thanks to you. Lua tried to speak and couldn't. At first, he panicked. Then he recalled that Tren Krom had spoken to him telepathically. He concentrated, and his words echoed in Lua's brain. What have you done? I didn't quick agree to this. You said, whatever it takes, Tren Krom replied. This is what it took, but do not fear. I will honor our bargain. I will use what I know to stop Teridax. All I ask in return is freedom. Is a life spent in exile here so high a price to pay for the safety of all you know and love? Before Lua could form an answer, Tren Krom, in the body of the Toa Nuva of air, had left the cave. Lua tried to pursue, But the great bulk of this body was a part of the island itself. He could not move. "And if I don't find a way to get my body back," he said to himself, "I'm going to be ever trapped here for good." Tren Krom stood on the shore of what had been his island for so many thousands of years. His home, his prison, his place of torment. For almost as long as he could remember, he had been trapped here by the power of the great beings. By all rights, he should hate them and their creation, Matanui, and want revenge. Strangely, he did not. Yes, he had raged against his imprisonment and vowed vengeance more than once, but as time passed, he grew wiser, recalling the old saying that no one fights in a burning house. Pulling down the great being's creation would not profit him at all. In fact, it would mean his death as well. And, despite having been pushed aside for Matanui more than 100,000 years ago, Tren Krom still felt a sense of responsibility for the universe he once looked after. That was why he had tricked Toa Nuva Lewa into swapping bodies with him, so he could escape the island at last. What he hadn't counted on was that he would not get Lua's power over air in the bargain. Without this, and with no boat or air vehicle, he had no way to leave the shore. Still, that was no worry. He knew who had sent Lua to him, and so he knew the answer to his power. "Artaka, hear me." It was a telepathic message projected over an unimaginable distance, yet the answer came within seconds. "I am here, Tren Krom. I see you are still resourceful." "The body will be of use," Tren Krom conceded, "but only if I can travel in it to Metru Nui. You can make that happen." "And should I unleash you on the universe, then?" wondered Artaka. "The great beings bound you for a reason, so that Matanui could rule with no rivals." Tren Krom cursed. "Stop wringing your hands, you ancient fool. If you did not need me free, why did you send the Toa? You knew what I would do." Artaka sent no message back. Instead, the world around Tren Krom began to shimmer and fade. When his vision was clear again, he was standing in a subterranean tunnel filled with a collection of broken equipment and dust-covered artifacts. He had never physically been to this place before, but he knew what it was. The Metru Nui archives. "My thanks," he thought. Artaka's reply was stern. "See that you carry out your end of the bargain, Tren Krom, and do not even think of keeping a body that is not yours. I will find a way to destroy it before I will let you steal it for all eternity." Tren Krom ignored him. He was more concerned with finding his way to where he needed to go before Makuta Teridax acted to stop him. The archives were a labyrinth of tunnels, and none of the minds he had read recently knew the layout. He reached out, looking for a sapient being nearby who might know how to navigate the maze. He found something else entirely. His mind brushed against another, one of incredibly strong will and ambition. Before he could probe deeper, he heard figures approaching. Readying Toa Lua's weapon, Tren Krom braced for an attack. "Lua! Look, it's Toa Lua!" The happy cry came from a Matoran villager. A quick scan of his mind revealed his name was Kapura, and his companion was Hafu. But it was the blue-armored female that traveled with them that most intrigued Tren Krom. "Isn't it great, Hafu? Now we have two Toa with us, Lua and Tuyet." Tuyet? Tren Krom took the time to read her mind, being none too subtle about it. He saw her past efforts to take over the universe and her plans to try again in the future. This one was powerful and dangerous, but she might be useful as well. For her part, Tuyet just smiled. She knew this was no Toa of Air who stood before her. She had never met Lua Nuva, but no air warrior wearing a mask of levitation had the kind of mental powers she sensed. So who was this really? And why was he disguising himself as a Toa Nuva? If you are opposed to Makuta, then your help would be very ever-liked, Trencrom said, hastily adding in some tree speak for the benefit of the Matoran. I'm sure, said Toa Tuyet. You have a plan, I take it? If I did not, I am sure you would, Trencrom replied, looking her right in the eyes. Perhaps we can quick help each other. What a break, Kapura said, smiling. Don't you think so, Hafu? The Pomatoran looked from Toa Tuyet, who he didn't trust, to Lua Nuva, who didn't seem like himself. Yeah, wonderful, he muttered. The small group waited until nightfall. Then they slipped out of the archives, heading for the Colosseum. Along the way, they passed Toa Pooks and Toa Bamonga casually strolling through the city as if nothing was wrong. Who are they? Asked Tuyet. Traitors to the Toa cause? They're the Toa Haga, Kapura explained. Something happened to them. No one knows what, but they walk right past Rakshi like the monsters aren't even there, he shrugged. Intrigued, Trencrom touched the minds of the two Toa Haga. Ah, he thought. A simple trick. Teridax made these Toa see a false reality where all is peace and serenity. For them, it's an ironclad illusion they could never break free of on their own. But for me... A fraction of Trencrom's mental power tore Makuta's artificial reality to bits. Pooks and Bamonga shook their heads as if waking from a dream. Even as he restored them to the real world, Trencrom sent his power cascading into the minds of the other Toa Haga, freeing them as well. Perhaps fortune will smile on Metru Nui, and these Toa will return to their senses soon, Trencrom said. Time will tell. It usually does, said Tuyet. What will time tell about us, I wonder? Trencrom looked at her. Hopefully nothing either of us would regard with shame. Oh no, of course not, she replied with a chuckle. So where are we going? Asked Tafu. And do I really want to know? Trencrom pointed to the Colosseum. There. I have a message for Mata Nui. It may mean the difference between life and death for everyone. Mata Nui? Asked Tafu, incredulous. But Mata Nui isn't in there. Makuta Teridax exiled him from the universe, maybe killed him. How are you going to get a message to him? And what could he do to help us now, anyway? Trencrom looked at the Pomatoran. A strange smile came to Lua Nuva's mouth, the corners of it bent at an odd angle. The answer to both of those questions is the same. You would be surprised, Hafu. Very surprised. Toa Helrix had made a decision. Alone in her prison, with only the thoughts of Makuta Teridax and a portrait of Makuta Miserix for company, she'd had time to think. Teridax had made a point of telling her what he planned to do, harness the power of the Great Spirit's body and use it to conquer worlds. She had no doubt he could do it, too, unless he was stopped. But how? The obvious answer lay with the Matoran. There was an obvious connection between their labors and the health of the mechanical in which they lived. Simply put, if they stopped working, the robot would die, and Makuta Teridax with it. The problem was that Teridax would not tolerate a strike. No doubt he would slaughter some Matoran in particularly agonizing ways until the rest gave in. Brave as they were, the Matoran couldn't be counted on to stand firm in the face of their friends' suffering. There was, of course, another problem too. The robot's death would inevitably mean the death of everyone that lived inside it. Matoran, Toa, Vortex, Skakdi, everyone. The planet outside had no known land masses, and so no place to flee to. The inhabitants of the Matoran universe would suffocate or freeze in the darkness. As leader of the Order of Matanui, Helrix had often had to make decisions that sent agents to their deaths. It came with the job. But could she make a decision that would send an entire universe to its grave? Yes, as it turned out, she could. Teridax had to be stopped before he killed or enslaved billions of innocents in the universe beyond. She wasn't certain she could bring him down, but she had to try. Her prison was near a sensitive area, whose destruction might be enough to slay the Makuta. A Nova Blast using her water power might do enough damage. Even if all she could do was cripple him, perhaps others could finish him off. She closed her eyes and drew upon all her power. If she had any doubt or regrets, she pushed them aside. Helrix would do what she had always done, whatever was necessary. An impossibly loud pounding broke her concentration. Had Teridax already discovered what she was about to do? The next moment, a wall caved in. Stepping through the rubble were two Matoran, Toanuva Lua, and a figure Helrix never thought she would see again, Toa Tuyet. "You!" the Order leader snapped. "What are you doing here?" "You're welcome," Tuyet replied. "I had no idea you were locked up in here, Helrix. Poetic justice, considering how your kind imprisoned me for centuries, isn't it?" Helrix looked to Lua. Tuyet, free, was potentially a terrible menace. Perhaps if she and the Toa Nuva of Air acted quickly, they could take the rogue Toa down. But Lua was paying no attention to Helrix. Instead, he seemed to be fixated on the picture of Miserex. Makuta Teridax had transformed his old enemy into a painting on the wall in a unique and nasty act of murder. "Lua? What are you doing?" she asked. The Toa of Air ignored her. Instead, he muttered, "Interesting. Not dead, but so convinced that he is that he might as well be." "Don't mind him," said Tuyet. "He's not this Lua. I'm not sure who he is, only that he knew how to get us here. And now that we are here, I'm sure I can find some way to use our arrival to my advantage." Helrix glanced back at Lua. The Toa of Air had his eyes closed and was reaching out with his right hand, but no cyclone erupted from his outstretched palm. In fact, nothing was happening at all. And then, suddenly, something did. The portrait of Miserex warped, as if it was folding in on itself. An instant later, Makuta Miserex himself stood in the chamber, in full reptilian glory. The Makuta looked dazed at first, then his eyes filled with rage.
"Where is Teridax?"
he bellowed, so loud the walls shook. "Well," said Tuyet, "that was a surprise." "Shut up!" Helrix barked. "All of you!" She turned to the two Matoran. "Hafu, Kapura, this is no place for you. Go back to Metronui and get word to the Resistance. Tell them to be prepared to act, and tell them to make their peace with the Great Spirit and each other." Hafu took a step forward, ready to argue for staying, but Kapura laid a hand on his arm and shook his head. There was no fight coming that they could be a part of. Somehow, he knew that this Toa of Water was talking about the end of everything. Now it was Lua Nuva's turn to speak. "A message must be sent. Mata Nui must be prepared." "Who are you?" demanded Helrix. "You knew of me as Tren Kram," said the Toa. "Like Tuyet, I am recently escaped from my prison. Now I have a task to perform." He advanced past Helrix, walked to a wall panel, and tore it off. A small bank of machinery had been hidden behind it. As he started to manipulate the controls, Helrix, Tuyet, and Miserex all moved to stop him. "Hold!" Everyone in the room whirled to see who had spoken. Standing in the opened wall were Brutaka and Axon. Brutaka was levitating, and a greenish aura surrounded him. Axon's left arm hung useless at his side. Both looked like they had been through a war. Trenkram must do what he set out to do, Brutaka said. The three must become one. This universe must live so that a world can be whole once more. This universe must die, and Teridax with it, Helrix replied. Axon, Brutaka, I order you to subdue these three. Brutaka smiled. We no longer take orders from you, Toa Helrix. We take our orders from destiny. Just so you know, Axon added, Brutaka's his own we these days. Long story. Tuyet had stopped paying attention. She was eavesdropping on Tren Krom. Whatever message he was sending was for the most part not an audible one, but now and then he would mutter something she would catch. So far, she had heard the words Ignika and golden armor. Both were intriguing, to say the least. Enough talk, growled Miserix. Teridax is inhabiting this metal shell, and that means it gets destroyed, along with anyone who gets in the way. Don't start something you can't finish, warned Tuyet. I may have use for this universe. Brutaka, maybe Helrix is right, said Axon. Maybe this is the only sure way of stopping Teridax. Maybe it's what Matanui would want us to do. Before the startled eyes of Kapura and Hafu, battle lines were drawn. On one side stood Helrix, Miserix, and Axon. On the other, Tuyet, Luanuva, and Brutaka. If it must be, it must, said Brutaka. To save this universe, then, Axon, Helrix, and Miserix must die. Mazika stood on a ridge. Down below, he could see the remains of a dead village. He recognized it as having once been home to a small group of Ba Matoran, whose element was gravity. It looked like it had been overrun some time ago, but there were no signs of any Matoran corpses. Perhaps the villagers escaped into the hills, he thought, or maybe they were just captured. Your universe is very turbulent, said Makuta Teridax. The white-armored warrior stood beside Mazika. He came from an alternate universe in which the Makuta had never rebelled, but had instead stayed loyal to the great beings and helped save a world. He had come to this universe with Mazika to try and free it from the control of his evil counterpart. That's one word for it, replied Mazika. It's hard to remember a time in my life when I wasn't fighting. I've been lucky. I'm still alive. Not sure that can be said about the Matoran who lived down there. If they died, maybe it was a mercy, said Teridax. Maybe they are better off not seeing what their universe has come to. Now you sound like our Teridax, said Mazika. I guess you two aren't as far apart as I'd like to think. Teridax shook his head. A turn to the left instead of to the right. A wound received or avoided. Rising from slumber an hour too early or too late. These are the little things lifetimes hinge on, Mazika. Your Teridax took a step on a path that circumstances allowed me to avoid. If circumstances had been different, who knows? Meaning that if you took control of this universe instead of him, I might be just as wicked, Teridax answered. It is always a possibility. Around them, the winds rose. In a moment, they had gone from gentle breeze to a screaming maelstrom. So powerful it knocked Mazika off his feet and sent him tumbling toward the edge of the ridge. Teridax fought to stay focused, ignoring the storm as he used his power to keep Mazika from falling. But the ground erupted beneath his feet, shattering his concentration. Mazika fell down the slope, followed swiftly by Teridax. They landed among the ruins. Mazika's impact shattered the long-dead corpse of a Visorak into fine black powder. Teridax hit hard, but rolled with the fall and was back on his feet in an instant. Now that he looked around, he could see other bodies of Vizirax spiders scattered here and there. The villagers who had lived here had gone down fighting. Then a voice came from the dead mouths of the Vizirax all around. Teridax recognized it as his own voice, but touched with madness and evil. "I see you have brought company, Mazika. And such company." "It's Makuta," Mazika said. "He's found us." "Yes, I never noticed your entry, I must admit," Makuta said through the dead spiders. "But did you really think a pale and weak version of myself could stop me now?" "Weak?" said the white-armored Teridax. "Stronger, I say, for I resisted the temptations you could not." "Indeed. Then let us see just what you are capable of resisting." The air crackled with ozone, and then before Mazika and Teridax's eyes, 3 figures appeared, each resembling Takanuva, the legendary Toa of Light, but their armor was jet black, and shadow energy swirled about their hands. "I have been a poor host, brother," said the voice of Makuta. "Allow my new friends to welcome you properly to my universe." Helrix avoided Tuyet's slashing attack and landed a sidekick in her midsection. The corrupt Toa of Water staggered backwards, only narrowing avoiding being accidentally struck by Brutaka. The battle had begun only moments before, but already the chamber in which they fought was a shambles. The issue over which they fought was deadly serious. Helrix, Makuta Mizrax, and Axon had decided that Teridax's control of the universe had to be ended, even if that meant destroying the universe itself. Tuyet, Brutaka, and a possessed Lua Nuva believed there was still hope of driving Makuta out without killing millions of Matoran in the process. Mizrax thought he would have the easiest opponent. He could sense that Lua Nuva was not himself, but was under the control of another. Whoever that was, they had no access to the Toa's air power. That would make him ripe for defeat. Unfortunately, Lua's body was now home to Tren Krom, an ancient entity with enormous mental powers. Mizrax's first solid blow knocked Lua to the ground. The fallen Toa responded with a mental shock blast that came close to turning Mizrax's brain to ash. Still, Mizrax had been through a lot in the past millennia. Imprisonment, torture, humiliation, and no mind power was going to be enough to stop him. He gathered Lua up in his claw and slammed his foe against the wall. Once, twice, 3 times. Axon's heart wasn't in this fight. He had only recently rediscovered Brutaka and regained their old friendship. He couldn't believe they were already at each other's throats again, and he wasn't certain that Brutaka was wrong. Maybe Helrix's plans were too extreme. Maybe duty lay in protecting the Matoran until the very last moment. For this moment, though, he had to concentrate on protecting himself. One good hit from Brutaka would take his head off. Helrix had not wavered in her determination, but she also knew that this battle was sure to draw Makuta Teridax's attention. Her chance to act could disappear at any moment. She had to do the Nova Blast now, before anyone could stop her. Tuyet could guess what was about to happen. She slammed an elbow into Axon even as Brutaka struck him. Taking advantage of the moment, she wrestled the warrior's axe from him. With a yell, she vaulted into the air and smashed Mizrax with the axe. With a roar of pain, the reptilian Makuta fell backwards, right towards Helrix. The mad Toa hit the ground and turned to watch the end of her handiwork. But to her surprise, just as Mizrax was about to crush Helrix, the ancient female warrior vanished. The Makuta landed in a heap, but was barely slowed by his wound and was already seeking out his attacker. Tuyet never got a chance to defend herself. Helrix was suddenly behind her, catching Tuyet in a headlock. "Time to say goodbye," said Helrix. We'll all go down together, and the universe will be better for it. The world began to blur in front of Tuyet's eyes. At first, she thought that Helrex must be choking the life from her. But then she realized that everyone was looking toward the chamber's entrance, where space itself seemed to be warping. The next instant, a massive figure stepped out of the distortion and stood before them. "You imbeciles," the figure said, in a voice both old and young at the same time. "You ignorant stone apes. Is this how you try to save existence?" No one in the room had ever seen the newcomer before, but there were some who knew his voice, and all felt a chill of fear at the sound of it. Only Helrix had the presence of mind to give their visitor a name, and even she spoke it in a whisper. "Artaka." At the sight of Artaka, the chamber went silent. He stood at least 10 feet tall. His armor was gray-green and covered in runes carved at the beginning of time. His mask was the most ornate anyone had ever seen. More than just a Kanohi. It was a true work of art. The metallic protodermis from which it was forged was arranged in intricate patterns and designs, each reflecting one of the many cultures that flourished in the universe. The eye slits were angular and pointed, giving him an air of both wisdom and a vague sense of menace. Artaka stood in the shattered doorway, facing some of the most powerful beings in existence. His stance made it clear he was their equal, if not their superior. His cold eyes fell first on Lua Nuva. "Your task is done," he said. "Return whence you came." Lua Nuva stared at Artaka for a moment, then turned without a word and started to exit, only to be blocked by the newcomer. "Without the body," said Artaka. Lua Nuva shrugged. "Payment for services rendered?" "The mind of Lua Nuva is trapped within your old body, Trenkrom, as you well know," Artaka replied. "He deserves better than to suffer a fate meant for you." The mouth of Lua Nuva smiled, though it was the mind of Trenkrom that made it so. "The words come easily to you, Artaka. You chose to live as an exile. I did not." "None of us choose our destiny," Artaka replied, "and none of us can defy it. Go, Trenkrom. Have faith Matanui will reward you when all is said and done." Lua Nuva nodded. "Faith, yes, a drop of water in place of an ocean." Artaka reached out and placed the palm of his right hand on Lua Nuva's forehead. "It's more than time." The Toa's body spasmed, then dropped to the floor. After a moment, Lua's eyes opened and he looked around, dazed. "Where? I was in a cave, in an ever-ugly body, and—" Artaka ignored him. Helrix had advanced up to him, staring up at his masked face and making no effort to contain her fury. "This is no affair of yours, Artaka. Actions must be taken to contain the threat of Makuta here and now." "Creation is my essence," Artaka replied, "and you would destroy all that exists. I can't allow that." "You can't stop it either." "But I can." The voice reverberated throughout the chamber. It belonged to Makuta Teridax. "Oh, who invited him?" muttered Lua. "Invited me?" asked Teridax. "As I recall, you are all guests in my home, and you have been most rude and destructive ones. I am afraid I am going to have to ask you to leave." "And if we refuse?" bellowed Axon. "What will you do then, you formless freak?" Teridax gave a low, mocking laugh. Then he said softly, "Why then, I will have to insist. One instant, Axon, Brutaka, Helorix, Artaka, Miserix, Tuyet, and two Matoran were inside a half-ruined chamber deep beneath Mentrunui. The next, they were floating in the airless, icy void of outer space, watching as the robot Makuta commanded soared away from them toward a distant world. I told you this was a bad idea, said Toa Kongu. Quiet, hissed Toa Holly. Is the Order sure of its information? Asked Nuparu. As sure as they can be, with things as they are, replied Huki. Then we better get to work, said Jaller. The 5 surviving Toamari were crouched on the western shore of the island of Zakaz, home to the murderous Skakti race. Ordinarily, it wasn't the sort of place any sane person wanted to visit, wrecked as it was by a millennia-old civil war. Back when they were Toa Enaika, Jaller and his team had battled 6 Skakti, the Paraka, and barely escaped with their lives. Their mission here was as simple as it was perilous. The Order had learned that Nektan, a powerful Skakti warlord, had allied with Makuta Teridax and led his army on a journey south. Now it was vital to find out if any of the other warlords were going to follow his lead. On top of that, there was a mystery to be solved. Following the widespread destruction on Daxia, the sea snakes that were once the evil Paraka had vanished. It had been believed that they were just buried in the rubble, but rumors were flying that they had been rescued and spirited away to Zakaz. For what purpose, no one could say. To accomplish either of these, they had to get past the Skakti guards on the shore. That was Kongu's job. Using his control of air, he robbed the guards of anything to breathe until they passed out. Once they were down, the Toamari advanced. Their next obstacle was a small encampment of warriors, surrounded by a wall of thick stone. Want me to bring the wall down? Asked Toa Huki. Just like we planned, nodded Jaller. Huki concentrated and extended his power over stone to the wall. The next moment, the rocks began to explode. The alarmed Skakti, thinking they were under attack by another tribe, rushed to their defenses, but couldn't spot the enemy. After a few minutes of bombardment, they scaled the rubble and fled into the night. Jaller turned to the Toa of Water. Holly, it's this way, she answered, taking the lead. The Toa moved swiftly across the uneven terrain until they reached the mouth of a cave. By now, they could all hear the rushing of water. Holly led them inside, where they saw an underground river. Perfect, said Nuparu. The Order says that will take us right into one of the larger ruins, said Holly. All we have to do is swim. That again? Asked Huki in mock protest. The Mask of Life had transformed the Toa Enaika into water-breathing Toamari not long ago. Then it had changed them again, making them true amphibians. One by one, they dove into the river and began to swim through the cold, dark water. After an hour or so, during which time Nuparu discovered that there were some very nasty fish under Zakaz, they emerged in another cavern. Just beyond the mouth of the cave was a large area of ruins, in which about 500 Skakti were gathered. One, obviously a warlord, was addressing the gathering.
The Brotherhood of Makuta is no more, he bellowed. The Dark Hunters are a battered ruin. The Toa are scattered and hiding like stone rats. Who is there left for anyone to fear? The Skakti! Yelled the crowd in response. I don't like the sound of this, said Huki. I think you're about to like it less, said Nuparu. He was crouched down, with one hand on the soil. Something is moving underground, maybe 20 bio from where we are. Something big. For too long we have been penned up on this island by the will of the Brotherhood, the warlord continued. And now one of their number controls our universe and believes he controls us as well. But we will show him he is wrong!
Okay, well, it doesn't sound like he and Teridax will be playing Coley together anytime soon, said Jaller. And I think he's just getting warmed up, said Holly.
Let our salvation now rise, shouted the warlord.
Here it comes, said Nuparu. Now they could all feel the rumbling underground, and soon they saw what was causing it. A huge tank was rising up in the center of the ruins. One glance, and the Mari knew all too well what was inside of it. That's energized protodermis, whispered Jaller. How did they— Questions later, said Kangu. Look at who just joined the party. The Skakti were hauling prisoners toward the tank. One was a Zyglak, the savage race of outcasts known for being virtually invulnerable to the elemental powers of Toa. Next came a Vortex, the crafty race that had spawned the evil Rudaka. And after that, one of the brutish race that served as laborers on Stelt. This makes no sense, said Holly. Even if they throw them into the liquid, the three of them might just be destroyed by it. Probably will be. So what's the point? None, said Nuparu. Unless somehow they know those three are destined to transform. But the only one who could know that would be Teridax, finished Jaller. They probably don't even know he put the idea into their heads. It's another one of his sick games. Just got sicker, said Huki. Or are those not the Paraka I see? The Toa of Stone was correct. 5 Skakti were carrying 5 sea snakes, each of the serpents gasping to breathe. At the warlord's signal, the 3 prisoners and the 5 snakes were thrown into the energized protodermis tank. So engrossed were the Skakti that they failed to notice a strange, greenish cloud that emerged from the nearby lake, hovered in the air a moment, and then plunged into the energized protodermis. The liquid began to froth and bubble. The Toamari could see a shape forming in the silver fluid, something monstrous and horrible. Tell you what, said Kangu. Call me when it's over. I don't think I want to look. I don't think the Order's going to like this, said Nuparu. I don't think anyone is, said Jaller. And then, before their eyes, a new and terrible form of life began to climb from the tank. How long is a fraction of an instant? Long enough for Luanuva to see the others in the chamber. Artaka, Helrix, Miserix, Tuyet, Axon, Brutaka, Hafu, and Kapura starting to shimmer and fade. And long enough to realize he was not teleporting as they were. Teridax was leaving the Toa of Air behind, no doubt for some sinister reason. Lua wasn't having it. Before that fraction of an instant was through, he had grabbed onto Brutaka. It was a risk, a big one, to try to latch onto a teleport in progress, but Lua was determined that wherever the others went, he would go. In the next split second, he found himself floating in the void of space alongside the others. Of them all, only Miserix wasn't succumbing to suffocation, since Antidermis didn't need to breathe. But the cold of outer space would claim him eventually. Makuta Teridax had thrown some of the most powerful beings in his universe out like the trash, and it looked like they wouldn't survive the experience. Lua summoned his elemental power, an effort in this environment, and created a thin bubble of air linked around the heads of all the castaways, except Miserix. "Join hands!" yelled the Toa of Air, seeing the group members already beginning to drift away from each other. Helrix turned to see the Matanui robots sailing away from them toward a planet in the distance. The world of the endless ocean was far beneath them. "Artaka, can you teleport us back inside?" she asked. Artaka closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them again, shaking his head. "Teridax is blocking our return. I can try to get us to his evident destination, but I cannot guarantee any of us will survive the journey. More likely we will all find ourselves materialized inside trees and rocks," muttered Tuyet. "We'll be just as dead." "This is no way for a warrior to die," growled Axon. "Teridax must be stopped," said Brutaka. "We must do whatever we can, regardless of the danger." Artaka nodded, but before he could use his great power, a hole appeared in space before him. An armored hand reached out and grabbed his arm, pulling him and the others along with him into the portal. The 9 found themselves sprawled on a damp stone floor. Kapura was the first to realize that the stone was moving, not to mention breathing. He cried out and got to his feet, backing against a wall. The bricks in the wall reached out to embrace him, holding him fast. An armored figure, his face set in a hideous grin, stepped into the light cast by the one window in the room. "Kind of rattles you until you get used to it, doesn't it?" Miserix's eyes narrowed. "I know you. You were among my rescuers from Artidax. You were the one who never shut up. Where have you brought us?" Helric stood as best as she could on the moving floor, weapon at the ready. "Vezon," she said. "Explain yourself." "Not even a thank you?" said the mad Skakti. "See if I save you from the darkness of outer space again, even if I only did it because he told me to." "He?" said Axon. "Who?" "Oh, I didn't introduce you? How rude of me," said Vezon. "Over there, in the shadows." The occupants of the chamber turned as one to look in the direction Vezon was pointing. They could barely make out a figure seated on the floor, chains affixed to his arms and legs. The chains were writhing like serpents. "Be careful," Vezon added in a loud whisper. "He's quite insane, you know." "Matoran," said a voice from inside the darkness. "Amazing. And the rest of you, how proud I am. If I could, I would embrace you all." Helrix took 2 steps forward, saying, "Is this another one of your tricks, Vezon? Who is this?" Vezon put out a hand to stop her. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." "You're not me," Helrix snapped, pushing him aside. She had advanced as far as the edge of the shadow when her armor suddenly began to strangle her. The Toa of Water fell back, gasping for air. "Would have been better if I were you," said Vezon. "Less painful." Axon slammed Vezon against a wall, pressing his arm against the lunatic's throat. "Answers, Vezon. Now." "If you want answers," choked Vezon, "you need to ask him. He's the great being, after all. Not me." A dry chuckle came from the darkness. "A great being, yes. That is what they called me, and my brothers and sisters. Angons once said that name was the worst thing that ever happened to us, because we started to believe it was accurate. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps that is why I am imprisoned here. But now you are here to free me." Luanuva glanced out the window of the cell. He was stunned to see a forest that stretched as far as the eye could see, far larger than the jungle he had called home on the island of Matanui. "Where is here?" he asked. "That's right. You wouldn't know," said the great being. "Welcome, my friends, to Bota Magna." Prydak picked himself up off the ground, seething with rage. His deal with the Shadowed One had been struck. He, Kalma, and Mantax had rebuilt their legions, while Elec had returned to the sea to gather his own troops. Of Karapar, there had been no sign for some time. They were poised to strike as soon as the Shadowed One unleashed the viruses on Makuta Teridax. The universe would be theirs to rule once more. Then, nothing. The appointed time had come and gone, with only a violent earth tremor to mark it. At first, Prydak thought the quake was a sign that the Shadowed One had succeeded, but it rapidly became obvious that nothing had changed. Teridax was still in control. Now Prydak had a choice: march on Metrunui and risk destruction at the hands of the Makuta, or stay put and risk rebellion by his legions. He had been a fool to rely on anyone else, he decided. The Shadowed One was, to use an old saying of his people, either dead or fled. Prydak looked around. His legion was armed and ready. He was a warrior, a conqueror. There was no other choice. "We march!" he yelled, to the cheers of his troops. In a chamber on the island of Zia, the The stone floor was littered with the shattered remains of precious vials. Of their contents, and of the shadowed one, there was no trace. No one would look very hard for him. They were too busy trying to determine why every vortex in a Kyo radius had met a horrible death, and just what on their island could possibly have pulverized living beings into fragments without leaving any sign of its presence. The Toamari watched in shock as the new lifeform emerged from the tank of energized protodermis. A mixture of Zyglak, a Vortex, a Steltian laborer, and the 5 surviving Paraka. It had been created by the barbaric Skakti in an elaborate ritual, and now it was free. It was terrible. It was beautiful. Towering 12 feet high, with gleaming golden skin, powerful muscles, and piercing green eyes, it regarded the assembled Skakti with the benevolent gaze of a creator. Only the vaguely reptilian cast of its face took away from its stunning appearance. "We live," it said, "and we hunger." "I don't like the sound of that," said Jaller. "I haven't liked the sound of anything in at least a year," replied Kongu. "Do you think they're going to be a meal?" asked Holly. "Wished it was that simple," said Huki. "But somehow, I think it's going to be worse." "You will feed me," said the new creation, "and in return you will be granted a wondrous gift." The Skakti moved a little closer. They were not a cautious people as a rule, and the concept of someone wanting to give them something, as opposed to them just taking it, was a new and appealing one. As they drew near, their creation closed its eyes, an expression of rapture on its face. "Is it fading?" asked Nuparu. "On what?" "I don't know. But let's make sure we're not the next course," said Jaller. "The Skakti are distracted, and so is that, whatever it is. Get ready." "Yes," said the golden-skinned being. "So much to savor, and so much to give in return." "This is it," said Jaller. "Whatever it's going to do now, so let's... Jaller paused, confused. There was something the Toamari needed to do, urgently. What was it? He knew it was important. Suddenly, it became crystal clear. Why hadn't he seen it before? It was so obvious, after all. "The Skakti are the superior race," he said to his teammates. "Stronger, smarter. We shouldn't be opposing them. We should be following them. Do you think they would allow us to serve them?" asked Holly. "Even if they don't, even if they kill us," said Huki. "What better way to die?" Throwing down their weapons, the 5 Toamari rose and walked forward, ready and eager to obey the commands of their new masters. Teridax studied the 3 shadow Takanuva who blocked his path. They had been sent by the Makuta Teridax of this universe, the one who controlled the giant robot inside of which millions lived, to kill him and his companion, Mazika. It was a good plan. After all, 1 Takanuva would be a challenge. 3 corrupted ones were deadly. Teridax had multiple powers of his own to choose from. In his time and in his universe, he had been a great warrior. No doubt Makuta expected him to pit his energies against those of the Takanuva in an apocalyptic final battle and, outnumbered, die horribly after a few minutes. Mazika would most likely not even last that long, though the Matoran would make sure his killers remembered the fight. "Ah, Makuta," thought Teridax. "We are the same being in different universes, but I am not you. You're a plotter, a schemer, not wanting to get your claws dirty if you can avoid it. You would think of all sorts of ways to fight the Takanuva from a distance, all of which would fail." Teridax unlimbered his warhammer.
You would never think of doing this.
He charged. Before the startled Shadow Toa could react, Teridax had swung his hammer, striking one Toa in the face and shattering his mask to pieces. Whirling, he landed another hammer blow to the chest armor of a second Toa, cracking it down the center. Mazika moved in then, catching the third Takanuva with a scissor kick and sending him to the ground. Teridax made sure he would never be getting up. The now maskless Toa staggered forward, firing shadow energy from his hands at random. One blast caught Teridax in the shoulder, badly damaging his armor. The warrior from another dimension did not have the luxury to feel pain just then, or worry about the antidermis escaping through the gap. He landed a sidekick in the Toa's middle while swinging his hammer again to stop the charge of the other Takanuva. The latter, still in the fight despite badly damaged armor, created a swirling fog of darkness to conceal his movements. "Let me," whispered Mazika. The Matoran stood completely still, reaching out with all his senses. He knew that at any moment the Shadow Takanuva could strike and kill them both, but he could not dwell on that fear, not if he hoped to survive this battle. There! The slightest scrape of boot on rock, about 3 feet behind him and to the left. Mazika leapt, whirled in midair, and lashed out with a kick. His foot connected with the Toa's mask, knocking it askew but not dislodging it. Even as his momentum carried him forward, Mazika landed a second blow to the Shadow Toa's neck. Enraged, the Toa hurled tendrils of darkness that began to strangle the Matoran. "Your friend is doomed," the evil Takanuva said, smiling. "You'll just beat him by a few—" There was a sickening crunch. The Shadow Toa's face went blank. He staggered forward 1 step and then collapsed, revealing in the process just how much damage a warhammer in the hands of an expert could do. The tendrils dispersed, and Mazika scrambled to his feet. "Where's the third one?" asked the Matoran as the darkness dispersed around them.
"There,"
said Teridax, pointing to the north.
"And there,"
he added, gesturing toward the west.
"Oh, and there's some over there,"
he finished, casually glancing to the east.
"His mask was shattered. I thought he might like to join it."
Mazika chuckled. "You know, Toa wouldn't approve of this. They don't kill." Teridax shrugged.
"Very noble, but considering the state of this universe, maybe they should have bent the rules a little more."
"Try telling them," Mazika began. Teridax held up a hand to stop him.
"Wait, something's wrong. Quick, grab my hand!"
Mazika did as he was told. Even as Teridax began to teleport, the world blurred and vanished around them. When it reappeared, they were standing back on the ridge above the abandoned village. A violent tremor was shaking the ground, and Mazika could barely keep his feet.
"As I hoped,"
said Teridax wearily.
"We escaped the worst of it."
"The worst of what?" demanded Mazika. "What just happened?"
"Your Makuta has fallen," said Teridax. "We need to keep moving, but first, we had better find some way to patch my wound. I prefer to walk out of this universe, not float."
Taipu was used to the darkness. He was, after all, an Anu Matoran, who had spent most of his life in the Metronui archives or deep in the mines. Of course, it was one thing to choose to live in the dark, and another to have all light suddenly extinguished around you. He took stock of the situation. He was lying face down on the floor of an upper level of the archives. The air was filled with dust. The lightstones were all shattered. Something extremely heavy was on top of him, making it impossible to get up and quite difficult to breathe. All of this was the result of a massive quake that had just struck Metronui, followed shortly after by a not quite as devastating aftershock. Taipu tried to yell for help, but could only manage a hoarse whisper. This wasn't a very good way to die, he decided, but it seemed to be one he had gotten stuck with. Then he heard something. Someone was digging nearby. Maybe they would find him? He tried to yell again, but wound up choking on dust. There were more sounds. He could hear voices now, familiar ones. Someone was yelling for others to keep digging. The terrible weight on his back was suddenly gone. Taipu felt two strong hands grabbing his wrists and pulling him out from under the rubble. He looked up to see Tamaru and Maku were his rescuers. Not far away, Kopiki was helping other Anumatoran who had been caught in the quake. Maku propped Taipu up against a wall and dusted off his armor. "Are you all right?" she asked. Taipu nodded. "What happened?" Maku pointed up. Taipu looked and saw a massive hole, and beyond that, blue sky like he remembered from the island of Matanui. It had only been recently that Taipu and the other Matoran had learned their universe was the inside of a giant robot. Now, someone had evidently punched a big hole in the robot's head. "I think Makuta ran into someone tougher than he was," Maku explained. "Pretty sure the robot's dead, and my guess is so is he. We're going to need to get everyone out of here and hope there's some place outside we can live. But in the meantime, well, there are a lot more people trapped like you were." Taipu got up to his feet. "Then I'll help. You need to rest," said Maku sternly. "I didn't rest at Kininui when those Rahi attacked," Taipu replied. He looked around at Tamaru and Kopiki hard at work. "I don't know where Hafu and Kapura are, but it looks to me like the Chronicler's company lives again." Maku smiled. "All right then, old friend. Let's get to work." Kopaka threw his weapon onto the sand and slumped down a rock. He was tired, all the way down to the core of his being. Tired of fighting and running and fighting some more. It seemed like that was all he had done since he and his teammates had arrived on the island of Matanui more than a year before. As he looked over the Barra Magna battlefield at the hulking corpse of Makuta's massive robot, he wondered if at last it was over. He had answered Tahu's call with all of the Toanuva, except for Lua. Side by side with other Toa and the inhabitants of this world, they had battled Rakshi, Skakti, and vicious black-armored warriors as well. Tahu had single-handedly defeated the Rakshi, and the others had battered the rest of Makuta's army into submission. The Makuta robot had been struck on the back of the head by an astral body and fallen faster than an avalanche on Mount Ihu. Now, one by one, Matoran and other inhabitants of the robot were emerging from the ruined shell into the sunlight of a new world. Using his powers to create an ice ramp, Kopaka traveled over the treetops of the new jungle. He wanted some time alone. Finding a likely spot, miles away from where the other Toa and Glatorian were assembled, he sat down to contemplate his future. The destiny of the Toanuva had been achieved, so he always had the option of giving up his Toa power and becoming a Turaga. But he had no real wish to wind up running a village or outpost somewhere. He could always just retire from adventuring, of course. This was a whole new world for him, with plenty of places to explore and maybe even some place to settle. It might be nice to do something besides battle for his life all the time. Of course, he had no idea what that something might be, but one thing he did know: there was no way he could lay down his weapons until Lua was found. The Toa of Air had been missing for days. It was possible he was simply in some other part of the robot and would be emerging, but he might also have been wounded or waylaid. As annoying as Lua could be sometimes, he was a fella Toanuva and a friend. Kopaka made a silent vow to find him wherever he might be. The first step would be to talk to the other Nuva and organize a search. Before he could do that, though, something extremely strange caught his eye. A section of the robot's surface was simply disappearing. There had been no explosion, no heat, no sign of the metal being cut. One moment it was there, and the next it was gone. What was even more bizarre was who emerged from the hole. A small army of Skakti, a strange golden-skinned creature, and the Toamari. The heroes did not seem to be hostages or prisoners. In fact, it looked like they were quite happily acting as beasts of burden for the Skakti. Lua will have to wait, I'm afraid, thought Kopaka. I need to get to the bottom of this, for the Mari's sake, if nothing else. Fortunately, the new plant life created by Matanui provided a lot better cover than a desert ever could have. Kopaka trailed the Skakti and their mysterious allies for miles. When they came to the shores of the ocean, the troop came to a halt. The Skakti could be seen talking and gesturing to the golden-skinned creature. The creature nodded once and turned to look at the cliffs beyond the beach. Before Kopaka's startled eyes, a massive castle took shape atop the highest of the rock formations. The walls were made of stone, and the towers bristled with weaponry. All of Metru Nui could probably have fit inside it, with room to spare. This is extremely not good, thought Kopaka. One Toanuva can't do anything here. Let's find out what 5 can do. Lua Nuva was in the middle of his own mystery at the moment. Transported to some place called Bota Magna, along with Toa Helrix, Vezan, Toa Tuyet, Miserix, Brutaka, and others, he had found himself in the presence of someone claiming to be an imprisoned great being who sought freedom. The members of his party had immediately fallen into debate on whether it was wise to free someone with so much potential power and evidently a tenuous grasp on sanity. Lua rapidly grew tired of the argument and found his way out of the fortress. The area in which he now stood was one of the most beautiful he had ever seen, even more stunning than the jungles of Matanui. He used his power to soar above the trees, taking in the majestic forest, beautiful rivers, rolling fields, cybernetically enhanced reptiles, and... Lua circled back for a second look. Yes, that was a lizard, roughly 40 feet high by the Toa's rough estimate. And yes, it did have a laser targeting system in place of one eye. Its teeth were polished metal, and its tail was covered in circuitry for its entire length. The Toa of Air watched as the beast pursued a smaller and much faster reptile. The prey looked likely to escape, at least until something flashed from the giant's mechanical eye and the ground exploded in front of his quarry. The smaller reptile flew backwards, tumbling end over end, and landed hard on the forest floor. The larger reptile swallowed it whole. And we thought we had Rahi problems on the island, thought Lua. They grow them big here. Swooping down for a closer look, Lua spotted movement on the forest floor. This time, it wasn't reptiles, but villagers not too different in size from Matoran. They were marching at a steady pace, seemingly unaware of the proximity of the massive predator. Lua decided he had better warn them. Landing some distance away so as not to startle the natives, he waited for their approach. As soon as they saw him, they spread out as if to surround him. He kept his arms at his sides, not wanting to appear hostile. Now that they were closer, he could see they were quite different from Matoran in some ways. They carried very crude weapons, axes and spears and clubs made from wood and rock. While they did wear armor, it was a strange hybrid of metal and plant life. One of the villagers, obviously the leader of the patrol, stepped forward and addressed the Toa. But Lua could not understand anything he said. He tried to use gestures to convey the message that a huge reptile was not far away, but the villagers did not seem to get it, or else just didn't care. They seemed much more fascinated about him. A few of the braver ones poked and prodded him as if they had never seen his like before. Now the leader was making gestures of his own, evidently asking Lua's point of origin. The Toa of Air smiled and nodded, trying to show he understood, and pointed in the direction of the fortress. There was an immediate murmuring among the villagers, not at all a happy sound. The next thing Lua knew, the points of countless spears were at his throat. Oh, thought the Toa of Air, it's going to be this kind of day. Angon studied his ancient equipment. It told him much about the state of the newly restored Spherus Magna. Matanui had gone dormant, at least temporarily. The original Matanui robot and its prototype had both been destroyed. The nanotech inhabitants of Matanui had somehow survived and were emerging onto Spherus Magna and interacting with the local inhabitants. The great being should have been pleased by all this. After all, it was he and his brothers and sisters who had created Matanui and sent the robot on its mission, which culminated in the restoration of the planet. But things had changed a great deal in the last 101,000 years. What might once have been cause for celebration now provoked very different emotions. They will seek the great beings now, he thought. They will want to tell us that all is well. Toa and Clitorian, Matoran and Agori will join together on this joyous mission. But all is not well. And if they go in search of those who brought so much glory and so much misery to this world, I fear they will find nothing but death. End of record.